Greetings, everyone. Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to the first episode in the new year 2025 of the Book Club. And the club is what you're seeing right here in front of us here. Mr. Ralph Tamborra, otherwise known as Count Ralphus from the Hudson Valley Squares. And I am Pardo. We're going to talk books. Yeah. How you doing, man?
Pretty good.
I love the Exciter shirt. Very cool. You got the coroner hat. You're all good to go. You got the festive stuff hanging over your
Yep.
head. It's still holiday season for me. I mean,
Yeah. Coming down soon.
yeah, we tend to keep a lot of our stuff up here till about the middle of January. My wife's like after Three Kings Day because she's from Puerto Rico and they celebrate Three Kings Day, and I don't even know what day that falls on, but I know it's like towards the middle of January. So usually we start taking stuff down around there. So I like having oh, I should put my lights on. Hold on. There we go. Can you see them? There we go.
Yeah.
All right, I still got those up there. Frosty's still hanging out, choking my Gibson Les Paul over there. He's not humping the Les Paul, as everybody sees. He's just holding on for dear life. But anyway, so Ralph and I have been busy reading a lot of stuff, and we have quite a few books to talk about today. And we're gonna I'm going to, especially in this episode, I'm going to start introducing and talking about some non-music books because I read all sorts of different stuff. I read lots of music books. I'm a Stephen King fanatic, so I usually read everything new by him. I got to get his new one. We both read like monster and horror stuff. We both do a little bit of true crime stuff. I like, superheroes and things like that and whatever. So we're going to not only talk about on the show going forward the music books we're reading, but anything else that we're kind of digging on at that given time. So I don't know how many you got. I mean, I'm not going to talk a ton about each one of these, but why don't we do? We'll just go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and you probably have more than me. But Ralph, kick us off with your first book you got to talk about today.
Okay, so I'm gonna do this in like a little group because they're like related. So we both had read the Getty book
Yeah.
this year. That was actually I started reading this. I went to my Instagram because that's where I post every book that I'm starting to read. So that was easy for me to figure out what I read this year. I just went through my Instagram and I actually started reading this January 1st last year. So, but then I had these the Rush books from the trilogy from Martin Popoff, and I had these for a couple of years, so they're not like super recent. But the thing is I was late jumping on getting Anthem, so I had to get it as a soft cover. So I didn't want to read these two because I like reading them in order, and I
Yeah.
got the leather bound versions of these. But then when I finally said, I'm not going to pay like ridiculous money to get the leather version, so I ended up getting it. So I ended up reading all three of these with the Getty book, and then I was figuring it out. It was 1,600 pages on reading about Rush this year, and plus
Nothing
I've
wrong with
read like
that. Nothing
I
wrong with
read
that at all.
I've read Popoff's other Rush books, and I read one of Neil's his books that he wrote. He got a few books. I still got to get a couple of his books, but yeah, you think, oh, that's enough Rush books for the lifetime. But of course, if Alex puts out a book, I'm going to be jumping on it right away.
Oh,
He's
you
the
know
only
it. Yeah.
holdout still, so
So I haven't
we
read
still
any of
waiting for
Neil's.
him.
Neil's books are good. I haven't read any of them. I've heard good things about them.
I read the one, and it was really interesting because it was like it was all about how when he would be on tour, how he got into the whole writing by himself in between and everything. And it was pretty much what he was listening to as he was on his trips by himself and what he was thinking about. And it was just a really unique book. Nothing like that kind of book before that I've ever read, where he was just kind of like just talking about like what he's listening to and what he's thinking about. And he was going through a lot still at the time. So it's a very deep book. And I read it years ago. I should have pulled that out. We could do an episode one day on just Rush books because there's so
Oh,
many of them. Last time I was at that Barnes and Nobles that by your house there was like a huge, gigantic Rush book there. I don't know who put it out or not, but it was like really expensive. So I just like looked at it and I'd like to get it someday, but I'm all rushed out for the moment.
I know, and the good thing about reading like either a book or a bunch of books about a specific artist or band, it's like it just makes you want to go listen to the music, right? And listen to the
Oh yeah,
albums. So you'll immerse yourself in the book and you'll be listening to the stuff. And by the time you're done with the book, you probably listen to all the albums a couple times over, and then you're like, all right, I need to walk away from Rush for about 6 months before I can go back in. But
Yep.
while you're in the midst of it, there's nothing like it. Because man,
Oh yeah.
I mean, and I'm going to talk about that with my first pick today too. Um, I'm a massive Genesis fan. And I heard that the Phil Collins Not Dead Yet book was really, really good. So picked it up. I'm a big fan of his drumming, and I love the stuff he's done in Genesis. I like some of his solo stuff, but for the most, great drummer and fantastic book and really interesting story, especially like some of the shit that's happened to him in more recent years. I mean, here's what you don't normally hear. Here's a guy who's been around playing in a popular band, huge solo career for all these years. And up until he gets into like his mid late 50s, because he's in his early 70s now, he becomes an alcoholic at like age 57. Never really drank
Mm,
much before then. But this
wow.
guy who just had no luck with marriages and he's got kids by all the different wives and stuff. And he hit a point in his career where he was having trouble playing drums because of all these back and neck issues. And he had all this time on his hand and whatnot. And he started drinking. And before you know it, he becomes a full blown, like raging alcoholic and he's got to go to rehab and all this stuff. So there's really interesting to hear that happening to someone like this so late in their career, right? Because you usually hear these stories about, these dudes in the 70s and the 80s, when they're young and whatnot. Not with this guy. It was a complete opposite.
Yeah.
But really cool to hear lots of stuff about his drumming. I went and watched his documentary that's on YouTube right now. It's all about him and his playing his drums and how, his influences and what he thinks of all the drumming he did all throughout his career. But it's really cool to hear the behind the scenes stuff during the early Genesis years and whatnot. And, how his solo career just like exploded. He didn't even expect it. He was the last guy in the band to put out a solo album and really, really cool book. And I mean, and this is what I love when you're reading like an autobiography. You're reading it and you hear like the guy's voice because I know that the way he talks, and all I'm doing is I'm reading his and I hear that high pitched little voice of his, that very Brit, and I'm like, it's just like Phil was just telling me the whole story of his life here. So very, very cool. I would recommend this to anybody who has a passing interest in drummers, Phil Collins solo, or specifically Genesis. Really, really cool. So yeah, back to you.
That's awesome. That's awesome with the when you talk about hearing their voices. There's three books that always stand out to me about hearing the voices. One is the Brian Johnson autobiography, because you just hear his voice, and as you're reading it, you can hear his mannerisms in the way it's written, even so you know it's like him writing it. The David Lee Roth book was like he's so all over the place that it was you totally feel like you're listening to it on tape as you're reading it. And the other one was the Steven Tyler book. For some reason, I heard his voice the whole time through it.
Nope.
But all right, so next I'm gonna do another little grouping. So we already did the review on. I did this Eddie Van Halen book, and you did the Tone Chaser. Now this was a mammoth book for me. I hadn't read it at the time, and 600 pages, and I was just doing the math on this one too, 1,100 pages because I just finished the Alex Van Halen book, but I'm not going to talk about this because I'm going to talk about this on a future episode when
Yep.
a couple other guys have read it. But yeah, this was really unbelievable. Like to read it, I never read a book where the author was so like his feelings were so throughout the whole book. Like everything touched him so much, and he had such a personal like way of writing this book, and
And
it
now
was
you know
really
why I asked him all the questions I did when we had him on, right? Because
yeah,
that's exactly
yeah,
how I felt. Yeah.
yeah. He did an amazing job. I mean, that's a one of a kind of book like that. You
Yeah.
know, there's I've never read anything that's written in that kind of structure like that. You know, but yeah, that's a lot of Van Halen, and I've already read the David Lee Roth book and the Sammy Hagar book, so I know Michael Anthony puts out a book. I'll be getting that too, you know,
Yeah,
and I'm
absolutely.
sure his would be really interesting. I'm sure.
I would love to know his side of the story. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's the one we haven't heard from. He's always so quiet and
Yeah.
humble, and he would definitely be a great read, and it'd probably be the most truthful out of all of them, you know, as far as like coming from him.
I would agree with that. I personally don't think we're going to see that till he's kind of done playing. I think he's still a little too active right now, and maybe that's for the best because then he can tell all the stories of him and Sammy, and yeah, but we'll see. I would love to read that. That would be really good.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, my next one, I was sent this by the author, and they really wanted me to read this book and talk about it here on the channel. So it's by Alan Byrne, and the book is Phil Lynott, Renegade. This is a
Mm.
it's a updated edition of a book that he wrote a while ago. So when did this originally come out? Ba, 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 ba. I don't know when the original issue came out, but it's a 2024 release, and it's on Sonic Bond Publishing. So there's Alan Byrne right there. So this is basically a story about Phil Lynott from Thin Lizzy, obviously, from when he was a kid through all the first bands that he was in. It tells the whole story of Thin Lizzy and really goes in depth too into his solo albums and his post Thin Lizzy career up until his death in 1986. And it talks a lot about the downward spiral, the latter part of his life, and it's pretty harrowing. I mean, this is a perfect example of the a great rock star who probably had so much to give, but just drugs and alcohol just completely, decimated him. But it's a really, really good story. It's not that long. It's just about 200 pages. Really quick read. I think I read it in 2 days, and some cool photographs and stuff in here. So everything you wanted to know about the various Thin Lizzy lineups, but more importantly, this is about Phil. If you're a Thin Lizzy fan, you need this one. It's really, really good. So I enjoyed it quite a bit. Alan, thanks for sending it. He even wrote me a little note in here. Many thanks for agreeing to review the new book on Phil. I hope you like it. All the best in 2025, Alan. So thanks, Alan. Good book. Really good book. I would highly recommend it.
I read a
More Thin
really
Lizzy to
awesome
come.
book.
More Thin Lizzy to come. So
I read a really awesome book about Phil. I forget the exact title. I think it's like Cowboy Song or so. It's
there's a
something like that. But
few. Yeah.
it's yeah, this one was a really good one. It's a nice thick one, and it really went into his whole like drug addict phase and stuff, and it was pretty sad.
I may
You gonna
have
look
the one.
for it?
Let me go see if I
You
got
got
it.
it?
I think I have the one you're talking
Yeah.
here. Where is it? I don't know. I got books all over the place, but I think I know the one you're talking about. So like kind of like a purple cover, picture of him on the front.
Um, I'm gonna go grab it. I
Okay.
know where mine is.
Yeah, there are. In fact, I think Phil's mom also wrote a book on her son, if I remember correctly. So there are a number of Phil Lynott books out there, and it's just such a fascinating guy. And they Alan talks a lot about how he could have had lots of success as just a, solo rock star, but he had a really hard time living down the expectations of what he always delivered with Thin Lizzy. And I think fans expected in his solo career more stuff like Thin Lizzy, and it wasn't that at all. It was very like kind of pop and R&B based and whatnot, and not like Thin Lizzy, not like the hard rock of Thin Lizzy. All right, did you find it?
I got my wife looking for it. There's like some
Okay,
stuff in the way, so I was like, God, I didn't want to leave you out here by just talking by yourself. But
that's all right. All
she'll
right, well,
grab it and pull it out.
that's cool. What's your next pick?
All right, so this one, pretty interesting one. To Hell and Back Again, Norway 91 to 93, my black metal story by Varg Vikernes. So Burzum, Mayhem, you all seen the Lords of Chaos movie,
Yeah.
and this is just a really interesting. It's a real thin book too. It's like a really quick read. I read this one just a couple of days. It's only like 150 pages, but just pretty cool to hear. He always complained about the movies and the Lord of Chaos book about the inaccuracies and stuff. So he goes through a lot of it and gives his version of it. So if you're interested in that, it's a pretty wild story and talks about his time in prison and all that. Very interesting if you're into that black metal stuff.
I would think at his age now, all these years later, he's probably past the days of wanting to sensationalize and play up the shock value of all that stuff that happened back then. So, because yeah, I remember reading that Lord of Chaos book, and I was like, Jesus, it's like it's some fucked up shit going on during those days. But maybe a lot of that was just over exaggerated. I don't know. So,
Yeah, that's how he kind of makes it too. My dog hates the mailman. I gotta mute myself for a minute. You go, I'll mute myself.
okay. All right, so let's switch gears from music a little bit here. I read a good amount of like horror movie books, stuff about horror actors and horror films and genre styles of horror movies and things like that. So one of my best friends, his brother, who I'm also good friends with, has been writing books the last bunch of years, and he's an enormous Hammer horror, Universal horror fan, and Vincent Price and all that. And he's written two books on Lon Chaney Jr. This is his second one. It's called Chaney's Audition. Man-Made Monster, and the Thorny Walk to the Wolfman. His name is Bill Fleck. His other book is called Cheney's Baby. That's the first book, and that talks a lot about uh, Lon Jr., otherwise known as Creighton, is his real name. His upbringing as a kid, having his legendary father, and him getting into the movie business, and his whole life and whatnot. This is more about his rise to superstardom. So this basically starts right before when he was in geez. I'm drawing a blank on the name of the movie. Anyway, it doesn't matter. He of Mice and Men. So his big breakthrough role in Of Mice and Men, where he plays Lenny, and then he winds up getting the starring role in Man-Made Monster by Universal, where he plays like a guy that gets turns into like an Electric Man type of thing with a bunch of other really good actors in it as well. And that is the one that gets him basically the role of a lifetime in The Wolfman. So this book basically talks about a lot of what went on from Man-Made Monster through to The Wolfman, and also talks about some of the movies that came after The Wolfman and some of his stuff that happened later in his career. So if you're a Lon Chaney Jr. fan, you need both of these books, and Bill does a great job putting in lots of like quotes and interview segments from all the various actors and directors and things like that. And you can tell that it's written by someone who's a really, really big fan who knows a lot about Lon Chaney Jr. So Bill, I know Bill's going to be watching because I'm going to tell him that because he's been waiting for me to review this. I think you did it. You knocked this one out of the park, Bill. And I would say anybody who has any remote interest in Lon Chaney Jr. and the Universal horror stuff needs both Chaney's Baby and Chaney's Audition. They're both really, really good. And I think he's working on something with having to do with Vincent Price, I think, going forward. So, and it's a short book. It's a quick read. It's like, again, about 200 pages and a lot of cool photos and information. And, this is the stuff you want to see, right? And I love reading like the stories of Evelyn Ankers and Cheney, obviously they played the two starring roles in The Wolfman. They hated each other, and to hear all the stories about how he used to torment her all the time, and she just thought he was a big, sweaty, smelly, drunk guy, and just a bully and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's got cool stuff. There's the Man-Made Monster. They talk a lot. He talks a lot about Lionel Atwill in here, who of course was the other big star in that film, and about all the weird stuff in his career. So you get a lot of that early on, but. Yeah, just great stuff. I love these old horror movies, the old Universal stuff. So I just totally enjoyed this. But yeah, Cheney's Audition by Bill Fleck. I can put some information down in the comments below if people want to go investigate checking that out. So good stuff.
Yeah, I definitely want to read that. I got a great Bela Lugosi book and I got a great Boris Karloff book, so that would be perfect to go. And I love how Chaney Jr. played the Wolfman, the Mummy, Frankenstein, and
And
Dracula. Like
Dracula,
not many of them played all four of them
correct.
classics, you know.
Yep.
My wife found this book. This is the cowboy song I did remember, but this
Not
was
the one that I
really
have,
really
but
good.
I've seen that one. Yeah, it's a good one.
This one's really good. If you get a chance, anybody into Phil, you're gonna love this book. But so my next one's another black metal book. This one was a weird one. It just caught my eye. From by Bill Peel. It's called Tonight. It's a World We Bury. Black metal, red politics. So I really wasn't. I was like, wow, what is this going to be about? And it was really interesting. I thought it was going to be like all one sided by the author, like if he was on the left or the right, politics or wise. But it really didn't come off as like overly any like version of like it wasn't like he was like on the left and he's pointing out this stuff or on the right. It's kind of just like talking about everything, and it was just really interesting. Again, it's like nothing like any other kind of book that I know out there. This really unique, really quick read. Yeah, like this.
Where'd you find that?
I just like I put in like metal books on Amazon sometimes just to see what else is coming out. It's crazy how many books are out today.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
when I was a kid growing up, like Hammer of the Gods was like the one book out there that everybody would get. But now it's like every time you turn around, somebody's putting out a book. So I just check and if I see something really cheap, like this was like pretty cheap book, and I sent the link to Nick Franco. I thought he might be interested in it when I was reading it. I said, hey, you might check this out, and I don't know if he did or but it was just something, you see it and if it's a good price, it's like, yeah, let's give it a try, and I'm glad I did. It's cool.
Yeah, I love taking chances on books. It's just, if it looks interesting, just get it. If it's a good price, why not? All right. My next one. So I've always been a really big Anthony Bourdain fan. And when he died a few years back, I was really bummed because you know, I always thought the guy was a great chef, and I always watched his shows on the Travel Channel and CNN, and I just loved this whole idea of this, like, kind of like hippie dude, who's into like punk and metal and psychedelic music, who, grew up having all those drug problems. He becomes a chef, and he's like a rock star chef kind of guy, and then he winds up becoming like a TV personality. He travels the world and eats in all the weirdest places and talks to the coolest people. And when he died, I was kind of like, oh shit, it's like in the way he died, by hanging himself and whatnot. But anyway, there's a bunch of Anthony Bourdain books. I'm actually reading another one right now, written by one of the guys on his production crew from the TV show, which is really great. But this one came out shortly after he died. It's by Charles Learson. It's called Down and Out in Paradise: The Life of Anthony Bourdain. And it's just I mean, what a like complex, complicated guy. Hearing stories of him growing up, and he's a big Iggy Pop and the Stooges fan, and you hear his upbringing. He was like no different than any of us growing up, right? Just going out and drinking and doing drugs and whatnot, just living that kind of lifestyle. And then all his early stories about becoming a chef and how he got into TV, and then all the fucked up stuff that happened to him, really late in his life. He started dating Asia Argento, the daughter of Dario Argento, the horror director, and that didn't turn out well. And I guess that whole breakup of that relationship might have been the impetus for him to want to kill himself. But just a really complex guy and a really, really fascinating book. But I got to say, I'm enjoying the one that I'm reading now more because it's written by someone who worked with him for like 15, 20 years, and he knew him really, really well. And you get to hear all the cool stories about what went on behind the scenes, making a lot of those crazy episodes when they're in the Congo and, you know, Korea and all these crazy places. So for folks who haven't watched any of Anthony Bourdain's shows, they're highly entertaining. They're really, really good. And he was just the rock star of the travel and culinary world to me. And I really miss him a lot. And I wish I would have gotten to meet him at some point. But yeah, really good book. Maybe on the next episode, I'll talk about the one I'm reading now. So Down and Out in Paradise: The Life of Anthony Bourdain.
Hmm. Sounds interesting. I know
Yeah.
he was friends with Harley Flanagan from the Cro-Mags, and I guess he's been on his show because I seen that clip. I never watched his show, but I seen the clips with Harley on, and it seemed pretty interesting.
He was really big in like the early punk movement, and he liked, like, he was buddies with Josh from Queens of the Stone Age, and he loved all the hardcore guys from the 80s. And yeah, really, really fascinating dude. And like I said, I think it would have been really cool to meet him. But you read some of these books and you're thinking, maybe it would have been cool to meet him, but he doesn't come across as someone who really fully embraced his stardom, and he was very private and just a regular dude, but really, really intelligent and like a perfectionist. And it's funny because you would think someone who had the early life that he had wouldn't kind of grow into that type of person, but he did. So yeah, pretty cool stuff. Interesting guy.
And they was with Asia Argento. That's weird because she had a lot to do with that Harvey Weinstein bullshit. That scumbag.
Yep.
Like I know she was one of the first ones to blow the whistle on him and stuff. So I wonder
Yeah.
if he was around at that whole time. But
He
all right.
actually,
So, but
yeah, he actually wound up, that they do talk about that. Bourdain actually wound up paying a lot of money to get her lawyers and to help her in her pursuit of nailing Harvey
uh,
Weinstein. So he basically was like, I'm loaded. I'll help you do this because she's a struggling actress. I don't know how much money she's got, but he like went all in on that relationship, and she she kind of from what it sounded like, she kind of fucked him over, and he threw all his eggs in that basket. And then when she
Uh,
started, she was like, you're being too possessive, and then she started. Apparently, she was messing around with like a younger guy, and he just like went off the deep end. So yeah, it's sad. It's really sad.
yeah, that's a shame to hear that part of it because I look at her as like a hero because she was, Harvey Weinstein was so powerful that so many women were abused by that scumbag, and none of them had the
That's
money
to do
or
anything.
the power to get behind going against him. So for her to be one of the ones, I always thought that was amazing.
Yeah.
All right, so my next one is the New York Hardcore Chronicles, Volume 2, 1990 to 99, a flyer oral history by Drew Stone. Now, Drew Stone, he runs the YouTube channel called New York Hardcore Chronicles, and he's a really cool dude. And this is a part two. I wish I would have had the first one. I got to get. They only made like 1,000 of them, and the first one sold out. So I'm looking to get a copy of the first one. But this was such a cool, unique book. He signed it to me, but it it wasn't just like, oh, here's a cool looking flyer, and it wasn't like a book on just flyers. Basically, what would it would be like a cool flyer, but then they would talk about the club, and it would be he would interview bands that played that club, and there's like a section here on the Limelight. There's like Coney Island High, and so it's not just about the flyers. It's about all the cool stories that go around with the clubs and interesting things that happened around that time. But just a really cool, unique book, and I would love to see like a metal version because this is more of the hardcore world, but it'd be cool to have metal that you could do this for each decade, metal flyers, and then tell stories about it. But they go into L'Amour's and all the great clubs that have come and gone. So very interesting book. If you get a chance, get this. And there's a part one out there. I got to find myself.
That reminds me of the the New Jersey metal scene book that Frank White and drawing a blank on his buddy's name. That's a really cool book too. Again, it's got, talks about all these like, unknown bands, unless you were from there, all these unknown bands and all these bands who did make it eventually who were just coming up through the scene in like the early mid 80s and whatnot. So yeah, it's always I like those regional books like that. They're always kind of special, especially if you came from that place.
I think he had a big problem with his book too, is that instead of using just flyers that you'd find like hanging on a pole, he was taking like the ads from like the Aquarian and East Coast Rocker, and so for some reason those idiots had a problem with that, and they made him recall his books. And he has a version out now where it doesn't have the little ads. Like, what? Who would care, But somebody didn't like that they used them, so he had a problem with it.
Yeah, that sucks. That sucks. That's God. I know you can't use anything without permission these days, and it's yeah.
But if you got that first version that he put out, now that's worth a lot of money
Yeah,
because
I have the original.
because
Yeah, I got the original. So
yeah,
he had that at Chiller Theater when it first came out,
yeah.
and Dan Brown from the Warehouse picked Chris and I both up a copy, and I was like, yeah. So all right, my next book I got for Christmas, and I read it over the Christmas break, and I totally loved it because I'm a huge fan. I had a book years ago, which I don't think it was by the same author or same publishers, but a similar type idea. But obviously, it only went up to the films in like the early 90s. But this is called Godzilla, the Official Guide to the King of the Monsters. And I don't know if you can tell, but it's got the embossed front cover. So the Godzilla is raised and he's all bumpy and whatnot. It's very, very cool. It's an amazing cover. And then the back, All Hail the King. And this is put out by Welbeck Publishers. It's by Graham Skipper. And this basically takes you through every Godzilla film from the very, very first up until what's the list? It's one of the America. Hold on. Right up until Godzilla versus Kong, the 2021 film. So it doesn't cover Godzilla X Kong, the more recent one, and it doesn't have Godzilla minus one, but it has every single other film. And it gives you like a synopsis of each of the films. It gives you all sorts of cool photographs, some like cool like sound stage and behind the scene photographs. You get to see some of the guys in the costume, in the suits and things. Talks about, who directed each one, how well they did at the box office, who did the score. And it goes through all the films from the early films to the 90s movies. If you are a Godzilla fan, you need to have this. It's just absolutely amazing. And I what I thought was really cool, because I mean, I know these films very well, but it was really good to kind of go through and revisit some of the 90s and the 2000s movies, which I've seen, but like maybe twice, and I haven't watched in a while. If Rich Catino's watching, there's your boy. There's Baragon right there, Rich. Um, but yeah, just really, really cool stuff. If you're a Japanese monster fan, you love the kaiju stuff. This is an amazing, amazing book. So your dog agrees. See that? It's like more Godzilla, more Godzilla. So yeah, all hail the
Yeah,
king.
that oh,
A really good book, and it's hardcover. So and I don't know how much it's retailing for. I think it's $35. So it's totally worth it if you love Godzilla. It'd be kind of cool if they come out with like a next edition of this, because at the rate we get Godzilla films, it's like, so again, it's missing two films, but it's got Shin Godzilla, and like I said, it's got all of the American recent ones up until the first Godzilla versus Kong. So, and it also talks about some of the video games, and it talks about some of the cartoon series that have come out, and the manga and all that kind of stuff. So and comic books and things. So very, very cool. Very cool. Here.
that book looks beautiful. I got a whole bunch of Godzilla books, but
I know,
that looks
I
really
do
awesome.
too. I got a Gamera book. I got all sorts of. This is. I mean, I fell in love with. Again, I don't think you guys can appreciate it just from seeing it on the screen, but the cover is just gorgeous. It's the whole Godzilla
Yeah,
head is all raised, and it's all like bumpy and stuff. So it's very, very cool looking. And I believe this. I'm trying to think of what film this was taken from.
that looks like Shin. That looks like Shin
I
Godzilla
think it
there.
is Shin. Yeah, actually. So you can kind of, yeah, you can kind of see it there. So it's all, yeah, very, very cool. Good stuff.
Yeah, yeah, it looks sick.
I'm a
All
sucker for.
right, so you ever go to the store Ollie's in
Oh yeah,
Middletown? You
yep,
ever check?
yep.
Yeah, they got a nice book section there. That's the books on discount, and every time I go there, I find something. So this is a great one I found this year. Is Hendrix, the illustrated story.
Oh, wow.
Nice, nice, pretty not too thick, but uh, just great pictures in here.
Nice. Anything Hendrix is, yeah.
Yeah, there's so many books on them and stuff, but you always, if you read different books, you always find something different. And
Oh, absolutely.
having all the pictures makes it a little different too. There's plenty of illustrations in here and stuff, and just really cool. I every time I run into a book like this, it's great. Even if I had read one in that same year, I could, if it's got lots of pictures, even like how Martin Popoff will have like a lot of those books where he has a multiple books on a certain band, but one book will have like a lot of pictures, and it makes it different, and it gives it a different life. And you can never get enough of certain bands, and they're so iconic and so legendary that it's just really interesting. You always find something new to read and to learn about in there.
Oh,
So
yeah.
that was a really cool find.
Yeah, that looks really good. And that's a perfect segue, speaking of Martin Popoff and speaking about big picture books, to a book of his that I hadn't picked up when he first released it. But one day we were chit-chatting and he brought it up, and I was like, geez, I got to get that book because I love his visual biography books. And this is the Thin Lizzy visual biography. This book is enormous. As you can see, it's
Nice.
big. It's could knock someone out with this. Uh, and if you love just classic vintage photographs of everything, Thin Lizzy, this is an amazing, amazing book. Just like, he's got like the Uriah Heep one, he's got the Nazareth, he's got Maiden and Priest and Zeppelin and, all these great books. And these are just amazing. It's like album by album, tour by tour, lineup by lineup, just amazing stuff. And like I said, if you're a fan of any of these bands, these visual biography books I think are spectacular. And it's just a great timeline. It just goes through every year and all the cool things that were going on in the world of Thin Lizzy and the various members. And even if like, members leave on the timeline, you'll see what's going on with those members in whatever years here. So Very, very cool stuff. And this even goes up till the more recent activity with Lizzy and Black Star Riders and whatnot. And I love the cover. Such a great shot of Phil on the cover. So yeah, and that's my last one for today. But yeah, this is a great book. And when did this come out? Because it's a few years old. This is not one of the more recent. This is 2020. So this is 5 years old already. But a really, really good. And one of the only one that I missed because I have all of his other ones there. I have a whole shelf over there. It's got all the big visual biographies, and they're all like twice the size of all the other ones. But yeah, good stuff. All right. So
That
all
that
you
one
for the rest of the
that
way.
one that one looks awesome. I have a Thin Lizzy book that's like just on the band and has like lots of great pictures and stuff, but that I got to get that one. Here's another one that I found from Ollie's, and it's very similar. Different people, but almost looks like the same. It's the same exact size as the other book, but here's the one on the Who. It's
Oh,
called The
cool.
History of My Generation by Matt Snow. And again, it's just, packed with pictures, and it goes, from the timeline of the beginning to the end, or well, up until this point, because they're still a band, still going,
Yep.
after all these friggin' years.
That's another
Another one I
band.
got
That's
from
another band that
Ollie's.
I've read so many books on, and I just keep reading them. Such a fascinating bunch of guys, though,
Yeah,
that band.
yeah, I've read Pete Townshend's book. I read Roger Daltrey's
His book
book,
was great.
and and the Ox's book was great. Did you read Ox?
I didn't
The
read
one called
Ox.
the Ox.
No, I should read that. Did you read Moon? Moon is great.
No, that's the only one I don't got, and people always talk about how great that one is. That's
Oh,
the only one I haven't read, but
I
the
read
Ox one was
Moon
really good.
years ago. That was the first Who book I read, and I've read a couple Pete Townsend books, but I got to tell you, his autobiography was fantastic. Loved his autobiography. I haven't read Rogers, and I haven't read the Entwistle book. I should.
The Ann Switzel book was good. It kind of reminds me of what you were saying earlier about getting hooked on becoming an alcoholic at 57. Well, Entwistle was partying all those years, but when he was like up to the end, he was doing cocaine and
Like crazy.
hanging out with like hookers and stuff. Like he was like still living like a 20-year-old at the end of his. And you just like, as you're reading it, you're like, how's this guy still alive? Like he should have probably went when Moon went, because he was just as out of control. But
Yeah, yeah.
I really love, the more out of control a guy is, the more I like their books. Like I like the crazier stories. Like when you read the Ace Frehley, Paul Stanley, Gene Simmons, and Peter Criss books, I love the Peter and Ace books because they were drug addicts and out of control. Gene Simmons' book was boring to me, and Paul's was like, they were like cool, but they just were kind of boring compared to the out of control stuff. And like the
I
Paul
agree with you.
Diano
Yeah,
book was just,
the crazier books are more entertaining. Like, did you ever read the Glenn Hughes book?
no, that would be
Oh
another
my
one I gotta
God,
get.
that's one of the craziest ones. Yeah, I wonder how he's still alive today after all the stuff he did to himself. Yeah, that's a really crazy book. Yeah.
Yeah, there's so many I got to catch up on though. So that's what's great about doing this, is learning about books. And it's like I knew that book's out there, but I just haven't seen it in a store or something. But if it comes across on Amazon, then I go, oh yeah, I got to get that. Here's another one, same size as those other ones, and another one from Ollie's, Pink
Okay.
Floyd Beyond Behind the Wall, and it's kind of like, actually I might as well talk about this one at the same time. Like I read the Martin Popoff's Dark Side of the Moon one this year, came out the year before I believe, but this is great how it's 50 years focusing on just on this one album.
Yep.
And I love that, like a whole book on a great legendary album like that. And this is actually the second book that I have on just the wall. I got this other one by Gerald Scarfe, the animator and the artist that did all that artwork there in the wall. And I got a whole beautiful book on his work with the wall, but it's a lot about the movie and stuff. But of course, they talk about the album. But it's just great. If you love that album, you're reading a whole book on just that album. So
Yeah.
these
Yeah.
are really cool. Um, Here's another interesting one. I thought this one's called Triple X Fanzine, 1983 to 1988, hardcore and punk in the 80s. So this book is a fanzine, and they put all the fanzines into one book.
Ah.
So it's and this is actually like the third book that I have that's like this, like the old punk magazine that before they even called punk music punk. they had a magazine, like a fanzine called Punk, and I have that book, and then I have another book called Metallion, the one from the guy in Norway that did all the black metal and death metal bands and stuff from back then, thrash. But so yeah, it's really interesting because it's like going back in time and reading old magazines, and there's tons of great pictures in here, and it was just interesting seeing like the rise of like crossover music kind of infiltrating, because it starts off in 83 where that's not happening yet. So
Right.
as you're reading, it'll be like a review all of a sudden, like there'll be a review about Kill 'Em All in there, mixed in with all these hardcore bands. But this new thrash music is something new and it's kind of fitting in. And it was kind of cool to see how it was like being accepted by people. And Venom would be get talked about and mentioned. Like the punks were like, yeah, this band's cool, you know. And Motorhead, of course, was in there. But then even like when Voivod hits the scene, they're getting included in this. And this was based out of Boston, so it was all the bands that came through Boston at the time. This guy would do interviews with them, and he had this small little fanzine, make a couple hundred of them and sell them really cheap. But he kept them all and compiled them all into one book, and it's a really unique thing. And this is one of those things you see on Amazon. You go, oh, I'll give that a try, and it comes in this little flimsy thing. But this was a Dio unofficial scrapbook, and this was, don't waste your time on stuff like that. It's just so ridiculous. It's I got an Eddie Van Halen one like this. I didn't even pull it out too. It's like a little Van Halen. It's a little flappy thing. You see it, and it's real cheap, so you think, oh, that's cool because it's cheap. But then you get it, and it's like, oh, that's why. But here's my last one, and this was a really, really good one. So the Scott Burns sessions, A Life in Death Metal, 87 to 97. And what was really cool about this is it says right on the back, it's like he he um he recorded, oh, of course, the Moore Sound in Florida, and he was like the known guy to go to if you were a death metal band in the early 90s. Everybody was going to him, but it goes in order. Like he starts off, he works on Ticket to Mayhem by Whiplash, and that's like his like first uh production where he's doing something really heavy. And then it goes in order through there, and it's great. It's got pictures, and each band that he every album he does gets like its own chapter. So it's like, and oh, the other cool thing, it's written by two guys, but my friend Ray, he went to the Decibel Fest in Philly, and Scott Burns was there signing copies, and he got me a copy and got it signed to me by both authors, which was really cool. But I love the structure of this book. Like it was, it starts off, here's Whiplash. He got some pictures of them in the studio. Then it goes Cannibal Corpse, Death, Sepultura, Obituary, Deicide, Suffocation, Cynic, Gore Guts, Terrorizer, Atheist, Malevolent Creation, Exhorter, Pestilence, Massacre, 6 Feet Under. I mean, he's got so many, but it's just a great, you know, uh, time capsule of all the bands and what they wanted at the time, what the labels were paying them, and everything. Very interesting. You read all the books about the bands, but there's not as many books about producers. But there's a few of them out there. I've been. I just read about. There's a Ted Templeton book there out there. I guess that's a really good book to read about Van Halen. But I guess my dog doesn't like me talking about this one. That's the one thing I hate about doing these episodes in the daytime. At nighttime, there's nobody outside. If anybody's outside, my dog
You
goes
go
crazy,
nuts.
hates people.
Yeah, I mean, Scott Burns was the go-to guy in death metal for quite a number of years. I mean, he was the most prolific producer for that style of music. So that's got to be a treasure trove of information. I'm sure he's got great stories to tell about working with all these bands and the quirks of each band and what they were looking for and whatnot. So, and he definitely had
Yeah,
his
and the guy,
style.
it was cool how like the guy who helped write the book with him, like he went and found the bands and got recent interviews with them and stuff to add to the book. So it's like they're going back and giving their memories all these years later and stuff.
30,
So it was
25,
a really
30,
cool
35
book.
years
If
ago.
you,
Yeah. I would like to read that. That'd be pretty cool.
yeah,
Yeah. Cool.
yeah, it's really, really good. And it was another quick read, you read a chapter and it kind of makes you want to go listen to each album after you got done reading the chapter. It's like, oh yeah, let's go back to that Gore Guts album that you
Yeah.
haven't put on in years or whatever.
It's what it's all
Really
about.
good.
Music books are they make you want to go and listen to the music or the albums. The books on films and stuff like that, they make you want to go watch the movie again. You know, if you're reading about an actor, you want to go watch the movies. That's what it's all about. To me, it's like reading books is a fantastic way to pass the time because it like prompts you to do other things, right? So it allows your mind to kind of work and you shut everything else off and you just kind of you read, you let it kind of simmer through here, and then you like I said, it makes you want to go do other things. And you know,
I got this Judas Priest book that you gave me. This one I've been kind of holding on to because these album by album books, I really like reading these in the summertime or when it's nicer out because I like sitting outside with a beer and I put the music on while I'm reading. I just leave it on in the background and it's like you're reading album by album. So just I like reading it and having the album going at the same time. So I kind of save these are more like outside. I actually told Martin that I'm like, yeah, I'm saving this one for when it gets nice out. But I'll definitely be hitting that when it gets warm up. But it's like perfect. Those album by album books are perfect for outside reading and listening to the music while you're reading it. You know.
so you know the story about that book is that was supposed to come out a while ago, because we had worked on that, geez, a year and a half ago, at least. And then Priest announced they were doing a new album, which of course is the most recent one. So the publishing company wanted us to hold off on releasing it till the album came out, and we can do that last chapter on Invincible Shield before we release it. So if it wasn't for that album, you might have had that for a summertime read.
Huh.
Yeah, that right.
That's a smart move. I think that's a smart move because how about if that ends up being the last album and it's like your book goes up to the
It's
album before the last album? It's
right,
like
exactly.
you
It
wait.
was the right call, but it sucked having to wait so long because I know, like you know, I'm sure Martin wanted to get it out, and you know, me as a participant in the book, I was anxious to see it,
Oh
but
yeah,
it was the
sure.
right call. It was completely the right call, you know. So
That's so cool that you got to be part of that book. That's awesome.
yeah, I mean, I've been lucky to work on a few books now. A few of Martin's. I've worked with Tim Derling on a couple of his as well. So it's always nice to be asked. You know, it's a lot of work, but it's you know. It's fun. It's fun. It's good to see you know, your thoughts and whatnot in print, which is kind of nice.
Yeah,
Maybe one day I'll write my
really
own
cool.
book. I don't know. Like, God, at this point, I wouldn't have the time, but maybe like when I'm retired or something like that. Who knows? Who knows? I've always wanted to. It's just a matter of just sitting down and doing it, right? But then I see how busy Martin is with his books, and I'm like, I don't know if I could fit that into my life right now. Maybe someday, though. Maybe someday. So anyway, folks, that's our books for today. We got quite a lot. We got through a lot, but we've hadn't done an episode in a while, so it was good. And like I said, we both me, I was sick throughout the holidays, so I did a lot of reading because I couldn't really do much of anything else. So it was good to kind of get caught up on some things that have been hanging around. But we'll be back fairly soon with something else because I'm busy reading books. I got a couple sitting waiting to be read. I'm going to go out and get that Alex Van Halen book probably today or tomorrow, so that on a very future episode, probably the next one, we'll talk in depth about that. And our good friend Jack Toledano is also reading it as we speak. So,
Oh shit.
you got one more?
I just realized, yeah, I got one last one
Okay.
as this Frank Zappa book, but it's an old one, Electric Don Quixote. And this was a really hard book for me to read because it was so thick and I'm not super familiar with all his albums. I think I mentioned that to you once before. And it made me want to go and listen to more, but he's got so much stuff. So it was hard because when I'm reading it, like I don't know all the characters. When you're reading the Van Halen book, you know all the characters. You don't have to
Right.
try to figure out who they're talking about. It's such an easier read. So this was a hard read because he had so many different people that he worked with and everything. But I learned a lot and real thick, really good. If you're a big Zappa fan, it's probably a must-have. But pretty cool book. Sorry, I forgot that one.
I have the book, his biography called, I think it's just called Zappa, and I read it ages ago. It's great. I would agree. If you're not all that well versed in Frank Zappa's music to begin with, jumping into one of his biographies is probably pretty daunting. Um, I would say there's probably some Zappa you would really like a lot. I could easily recommend you 5 albums to go check out as an intro to Zappa and the world of Frank Zappa, because there's some stuff you would hate and but there's some stuff I think you would really like. So you
Yeah.
gotta, yeah, it's Zappa's a
I got a
really
few things.
yeah. Have you ever heard
I
One
got a
Size
few
Fits
things and
All?
I see I'm not sure if I have. I had a friend that would liked them a lot and used to play stuff. I wasn't sure exactly what albums he was playing. And I see Grant has his shows that he does on Zappa, and I find them interesting, but it's like he has so many like live albums and everything like that that it gets confusing. But
Live albums are great.
there was there was a part in there where they talked about Eddie Van Halen coming to his house. And then I read Eddie Van Halen's book, and he talked about going to. And then I recently read about how Eddie Van Halen actually produced Dweezil Zappa's first album when he was like a 12-year-old kid and stuff. So that was interesting, the connection that they had there.
Yeah, Dweezil and Eddie were very close friends. Very close friends. In fact, Dweezil always talks so highly about Eddie. He's one of his main, I think his main musical influence, but they became very good friends. So yeah, it's amazing how, I mean, did you ever read the Steve Lukather autobiography called Luke? Highly recommend it. It's so good. Even if you're not a fan of Lukather or Toto or anything like that, he is just such a wild man, and he also talks a lot about Eddie because they became really, really close
Oh, they
friends.
were like best friends. I know that they're like best friends. I read about that in Eddie's book, and it gets mentioned even in Alex's book, like their relationship. You know,
Yeah. Yeah, Steve's book is great. I would highly recommend that. He's another that's another one of those books. And and I told him that to his face because I had him on the channel a couple of years ago. And I said, when I was reading your autobiography, all I could hear is your voice. Like you were sitting right next to me talking over my shoulder or whatever. And he laughed. He thought that was funny because he's got a very distinctive voice and he's so animated and whatnot. So I'm reading this book and I'm like, and I like, dude, shut up. It's like it was just like he was reading it to me. Really, really good. So yeah. Cool. So there you have it,
awesome.
everybody. Lots and lots of books to go check out. If you're into reading any of these, we would highly recommend them. We'll be back soon with more. Visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook, we're on YouTube all together, all the damn
All the
time. Let
damn
us know what
time.
you're reading in your spare time down in the comments below. And we'll see you next time here on the book club. And like I said, we'll probably have a guest with us. Maybe we'll bring Jack Toledano on with us so we can talk about Alex's book. And till then, for Count Ralphus, I am P. Pardo. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, everybody. See you later on. Have a good one. Bye bye.